Hey everyone, Dave K here discussing Magneto in Marvel Super War damage dealing mage. I'm super excited for Magneto. He really has a lot of potential, some amazing abilities to do some crazy damage. He's got that shield that he can generate himself. Really a lot of strengths, a lot of benefits to this one. Let's get to it. In terms of strengths and weaknesses with Magneto, he's really got a lot of strengths, I must say. Starting us off with the burst damage. He can do a lot of damage really quickly with his abilities. As we dive into them, you'll get a clearer picture of exactly what I'm talking about. But a lot of abilities that can really stack up for a lot of damage. That being said, he also has the ability to do a lot of AoE, a lot of area of effect damage to a variety of enemies at once as well. So really great for a mage, especially tying those two in together, the area of effect damage and the burst damage, sort of tying those two together. So far, one of the most hype characters for me so far. Super excited to try some Magneto. And in addition, he's got that shield and movement speed ability, which we'll dive into. That's really, honestly, I feel like it's a huge benefit for a mage to be able to summon that shield, to be able to have that movement speed to run into a battle or run out of a battle. Just that little bit of movement advantage where a mage doesn't normally have the bandwidth, the guts to be able to stick out a battle. Magneto's kind of covered himself with that shield and with that movement speed. I think he's really well built as a champ. Definitely looking forward to getting my run in with the guy. Now, some of the challenges, some of the weaknesses for Magneto. It's really more of a late game challenge, I feel like, especially as you're working towards Magneto's ultimate, you're working with his ultimate. You want to do a lot of that heavy duty damage, but it takes him a while to get to that ultimate, but also you'll find that in order to do the ultimate really effectively, you kind of need to be right in the midst of the enemy team, with them all kind of around you. So in order to be able to make the most of it, you really have to be able to position yourself well, which can be really tricky with Magneto. Makes him tough for the late game. Just something to keep in mind here. But I'm thinking we can come up with some solutions to possibly make that work for you, make Magneto work for us in order to be able to really crush it all game long. For Magneto's hero trait, we have Electro Sensitivity. Really cool hero trait, and it's important to use this one effectively. How the hero trait it works is after you use an ability with Magneto, his next basic attack gets additional attack range, so it'll go further. It gets additional attack damage, so it'll do more damage when it hits the enemy. And it places one of those spheres behind your enemy for as much as 6 seconds there. You can put an additional sphere on your enemy, and those spheres tie into some of those other abilities to do some extra damage. So if you're saying, okay, how do I want to handle Magneto? How do I want to make sure that I'm doing a lot of damage and being a heavy hitter and holding my own in these one-on-one situations or that kind of thing? What you want to do is you want to hit someone with an ability and then do the basic attack, and then do another ability and then hit him with a basic attack, and then do an ability and with the basic attack. You want to make sure you're leveraging that bonus range, attack damage, and extra sphere with the basic attack with the hero trait here. So make sure that you're keeping that in mind as you use your abilities. Unlike a lot of heroes who just want to go ability to try to knock someone out, you can actually do the most damage over a period of time if you utilize those basic attacks in between and take those additional buffs that is Magneto's hero trait. So make sure you keep that in mind as you're determining how you want to attack, how you want to handle those one-on-one situations, how you want to handle those larger battles. Consider the basic attacks. What are they worth to you at that given point in time? For 30 energy and 6 seconds, we have the Master of Magnetism. Magneto will launch these orbs in a given direction until they hit an enemy, quite a range on those. And when they hit an enemy, they'll do damage, obviously. They're magnetic orbs. What else are they going to do? So they do damage when they hit the enemy, and they can stack up over time, can do quite a bit of damage, especially as you level this ability up. So if you're saying to yourself, all right, which ability do I want to maybe do first to do a lot of damage in combat? Which one do I want to maybe level up and master first in terms of making sure I'm doing a lot of damage to my enemy? I think this is probably the one. I think you probably want to go in order here of the abilities in terms of leveling up and mastering these abilities. So I think this is one of the first ones you want to max out or get to the highest possible level just so you can deal a lot of damage to your enemies as quickly as possible. It's great to have these orbs to be able to launch those at those enemies and be able to do that additional damage. Magneto's second ability is magnetic radiation. How this one works is Magneto launches this wave of radiation. It'll also push out those spheres that are attached to any enemies. And when hit by that wave of those spheres, it'll also stun enemies that are hit by this magnetic radiation blast. So something to keep in mind here. It doesn't do quite as much damage as the spheres themselves from that first ability, but it does do quite a bit of other effects. Again, that stun, being able to leverage the spheres that are already attached to opponents and use them to continue to deal damage to your enemies. There's a lot of additional effects that make this ability quite worthwhile. So generally, if it were me, if I were approaching a battle, I'd say, all right, let me do the ability number 1 first, and then let me do a basic attack, and then let me use this ability, and then let me do a basic attack, and then I'll proceed on to my, maybe I won't proceed on to my last ability, maybe I'll start with ability 3, and then do ability 1, and then this ability, use this one last, since I get more stacks of spheres that way. Something to keep in mind, but we'll dive into that last ability here as well. For 35 energy and a 12-second cooldown, Magneto will create a magnetic force field. This force field can be really, really useful for a variety of reasons. First of all, you're creating a shield around yourself, but additionally, you're gaining a 30% movement speed buff for up to 1.5 seconds. So we talked about earlier his ability to grant himself the shield and be able to move quickly and escape from situations or run into those more intense situations to be able to use things like his ultimate. This is where all of that ties in. You want to make sure that you have this ability if you're looking for that shield, if you're looking for that movement speed buff. It is really useful to have as a mage. I'd say surprisingly uncommon for that type of unit, and surprisingly awesome that he has it here. So something to keep in mind if you're thinking, how can I get that movement speed? How can I leverage that shield? It's a great ability to have. Not the first ability I would max out personally. If it were me, I'd max out the other 2 abilities first. I would just kind of have this one as soon as possible and then continue to max out the other ones earlier, just because the buff here is the buff and it doesn't stack quite as well as being able to do those extra damage to these opponents, especially since you're a mage, and really what you want to do is be able to deal damage to your opponents anyways. I don't think it makes too much to focus, that doesn't make too much sense to focus too much on this one and focus on leveling this one up, as opposed to really doing what you're trying to do as a mage and focus on leveling up those abilities that deal damage. So that's how I would see it. I'd say, let me go for that ability 1, then that ability 2, and then this one because I'm really focused on dealing damage. That being said, having this, especially early on, being able to grant yourself that shield, being able to grant yourself that movement speed, can take you quite a long way. And of course, Magneto's ultimate ability, Magnetic Storm. This ability has so much potential, but only if used correctly. This ability has a variety of different effects, so let me make sure I communicate them all clearly to you here. So for the first part of this ultimate ability, Magneto will pull all of those magnetic spheres within range to himself. This will stun enemies for a second. It will pull them closer to Magneto, and it will of course deal damage to them on the way. At the same time, Magneto will grant that same shield to himself that he sort of gains before, so he's able to resist damage while these enemies are pulled in towards himself, and then he's going to do another big hit of damage to these enemies as well. Magneto's going to go ahead and release his Magnetic Storm once he's pulled all of these orbs in, and it does quite a bit of damage to these enemies, and it does even more, and especially more damage, the more orbs Magneto is able to pull in. So really cool how this effect is sort of compounding based on the number of orbs you've been able to apply to enemies and how close those enemies are to you when you're using this ultimate ability. Really nicely set up. But again, you can see how it can be a little bit challenging as a mage. You kind of need to be placed perfectly in the center of all of your enemies, and that can be kind of a tricky, precarious position to be in as a mage, and a heavy damage dealing mage, especially without having that much health, not being a tank. Now, if your entire team is inside a circle around these enemies, sure, maybe that'll work, but I don't feel like that's a situation one might be in often. So you'll need to move yourself into the middle of these enemy units, and there's a couple of ways to do this. One of them is to apply that shield, that ability number 3, which we covered earlier. Move yourself in quickly with that rapid movement speed, especially around from behind. If you can come around from behind, use that movement speed buff to get in the middle of your enemies, and then use your ultimate ability, that would be perfect. That being said, you can also use some of your other traits and abilities, such as the blink ability. Maybe you brought the blink ability with you to flash into those enemies areas. It's a little bit tricky because you might need a blink to escape from that situation in the event you don't kill enough of your enemies with your ultimate ability. That being said, that is another option as well. A couple of ways to get in the midst of your enemies and use that ultimate ability correctly. I personally would save up that ultimate ability, make sure I'm using it at the absolute perfect time when I'm in the center of those enemy units. That being said, you don't want to necessarily hold your ability for too long either. You want to make sure it gets used. You want to make sure you're doing as much damage as you can to support your team. So there's a couple different perspectives on that one, but just something to keep in mind is if you can use one of those abilities to bring yourself to the middle of the enemy circle, if you will, then that would really be beneficial for you in order to make sure you're dealing enough damage to those enemies with that ultimate ability to make sure that you can help your team win the game. And for items for Magneto, I'm looking at pretty much the same stuff I was looking at for Loki here. I'm looking at the Arc Reactor, I'm looking at Loki's Scepter even, and I'm looking at the Book of the Vishanti. And the reason for some of that is, again, you want to be doing that energy damage, the energy penetration. You want to make sure you're really pushing that attack power and those mage skills in order to be able to damage your opponent as much as possible. That's really your main focus as a mage, and really your main focus here as Magneto as well. And that KO assist buff never hurts as well. You could always use a little bit of armor, a little bit of speed with some boots, and a little bit of attack power as well. But I really focus on the energy penetration, and the energy attack damage that you're able to deliver to your opponents, especially as a mage. Again, you want to make sure you're delivering that energy damage. So just something to keep in mind how I look at my items there. I think those three are pretty useful ones. There's a variety of useful ones that you could choose from. That being said, I think that having that focus in mind of how can I deal the maximum amount of damage to my enemies as Magneto is really useful and something important to keep in mind here in Marvel Super War. And so we've covered a lot of Magneto's strengths, weaknesses, and capabilities here today. Talked about how Magneto plays in Marvel Super War, how Marvel Super War sort of ranks Magneto, and I personally rank Magneto in Marvel Super War in a very high tier. I want to give him maybe a tier 1 or tier 2 in terms of how well he does, how proficient he can be in this game, at least at the time of filming, at the time of reviewing these characters and their stats. I want to dive in deeper, and I want to be able to play around with them a little bit. It's still in beta, so I'm sure there's many updates and many changes to come here, but super excited to get some gameplay going. What do you think? Are you excited for Marvel Super War? Are you excited for Magneto? Do you think he'll be awesome as well? Or is there someone else you'd prefer and someone you want to hear about? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up button, give it a like so that I know you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for being a part of the fun with me today. If you haven't already, for more fun gaming adventures, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to stay informed. And check out my Twitch channel. I do some live game streaming over there as well. You will find that in the description. Twitch.tv/DaveK. Play a lot of games over there, and I'm really hyped to get some Marvel Super War going over there. You have no idea. It's going to be so awesome. So looking forward to sharing those adventures with you real soon, and until then, play on. For 35 energy and a 12-second cooldown, And so we've covered a lot of the abilities that Magneto has